On May 22, 1937, Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky arrived at his office in Moscow, ready for another day overseeing the Red Army's modernization. He had revolutionized Soviet military doctrine and built one of the most powerful armies in the world. His colleagues respected him. Stalin had promoted him to marshal just 2 years earlier. That afternoon, NKVD agents burst through his office door. They arrested him on charges of treason and conspiring with Nazi Germany. Tukhachevsky protested his innocence, but the agents dragged him to Lubyanka prison. For days, interrogators beat him brutally until he signed a confession he knew was false. The military tribunal lasted 1 day. 8 judges, all senior officers who had served under Tukhachevsky, sat in judgment. They found him guilty within hours. No evidence was presented beyond the forced confession. On June 12, 1937, executioners led Tukhachevsky to a soundproofed room in the basement. They shot him in the back of the head. Within months, Stalin executed 7 of the 8 judges who condemned Tukhachevsky. The purge consumed the Red Army's leadership. Nearly 40,000 officers were arrested or executed, leaving the Soviet military crippled on the eve of World War II. General No Din Diem heard gunfire outside the presidential palace in Saigon. His own generals had launched a coup. Diem immediately called the American ambassador, expecting support, but received only silence. The palace security forces, supposedly loyal, were already switching sides. Diem had installed his brother Nu as security chief to protect against exactly this scenario. But Nu's brutal tactics and secret police had alienated the entire military. The protection had become the problem. As rebel tanks surrounded the palace, Diem and Nu escaped through a secret tunnel to a Catholic church in Cholin. The next morning, Diem negotiated safe passage out of the country. General June Van Min agreed. An armored personnel carrier arrived at the church. Diem and his brother climbed inside. The vehicle's doors locked behind them. The APC drove away from the airport, not toward it. When it stopped, soldiers opened the doors. Inside, Diem and Nu lay dead, their bodies riddled with bullets and knife wounds. The generals who ordered their execution claimed they had committed suicide. Nobody believed it. The protection Diem thought would save him had guaranteed his destruction. On August 16, 1630, General Yuan Chonghuan stood in chains before a massive crowd in Beijing. The emperor had condemned him to death by lingqi, the slow, slicing execution. Yuan had defended the Ming dynasty against Manchu invasions for years, winning every battle. Now his own emperor called him a traitor. The Manchu army had used a brilliant trick. They captured 2 Ming eunuchs and fed them false information, then released them to escape back to Beijing. The eunuchs told Emperor Chongzhen that Yuan was secretly negotiating surrender. The emperor, paranoid and desperate, believed the lie immediately. The executioner began cutting. The crowd, believing Yuan had betrayed them, bought pieces of his flesh to eat. Yuan never screamed. After each cut, he proclaimed his innocence and his loyalty to the Ming. He listed every victory, every saved city, every defeated Manchu army. His voice grew weaker but never stopped. Yuan died after 3 days. His final words were a prophecy. The Ming dynasty will fall within 10 years. 14 years later, Manchu forces conquered Beijing. The emperor who executed his best general hanged himself as enemy soldiers stormed the palace. Yuan's severed head, preserved in lime, was eventually given an honorable burial by the same Manchu dynasty he had fought against. General Wallenstein was meeting with his most trusted colonels in his quarters in Eger. He had commanded the Holy Roman Empire's armies during the 30 Years' War, winning crucial victories. But Emperor Ferdinand suspected Wallenstein of planning to switch sides and make himself king of Bohemia. The emperor had sent secret orders to several officers, kill Wallenstein. That night, as Wallenstein discussed strategy, Captain Devereux and 5 soldiers burst into the room. Wallenstein reached for his sword, but the blade was too far. Devereux drove a partisan spear through Wallenstein's chest. The general collapsed with blood pooling beneath him. But Wallenstein didn't die immediately. He grabbed the spear shaft and tried to pull it out, staring at his assassins. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to curse them, perhaps to ask why. No words came. He struggled for several minutes as the officers watched. One soldier later said Wallenstein's eyes remained open and aware until the very end. The emperor rewarded Devereux with land and titles. The other conspirators received gold. Within weeks, the imperial army began losing battles. Without Wallenstein's genius, Ferdinand's forces crumbled. The war dragged on 14 more years, devastating Central Europe. The emperor died bitter and defeated, having killed the only man who could have won him victory. The Vietnamese general had been feeling pressured for weeks in 1954. As chief of staff of the Vietnamese National Army, Hin commanded real power, while Prime Minister No Din Diem held only a title. Every day, Diem supporters suggested Hin should resign. Every day, Hin refused. Then Diem made an offer. The army would receive full American support and modern weapons if Hin stepped aside peacefully. Hin could become an ambassador, live comfortably abroad, keep his honors. The general considered his options. His own officers were divided. Some supported him, but others had already accepted payments from Diem's brother. On November 29th, Hin called a meeting with his loyal commanders. He planned to arrest Diem that night. But when his colonels arrived, they brought different news. The Americans had sided with Diem. If Hin moved against the prime minister, the U.S. would cut all military aid. The South Vietnamese army would collapse. Hin realized the trap had been set months ago. His own army existed only because of American money and weapons. Diem controlled that flow now. Without firing a shot, Hin had been defeated. He flew to Paris the next day. Within a year, Diem had consolidated total power and purged every officer who had supported Hin. The general never returned to Vietnam. During a military banquet in Caracas on March 24, 1848, General Paz celebrated with his officers and political allies. He had led Venezuela to independence and served as president 3 times. Now at 60, he commanded absolute loyalty from the army he had built. His son-in-law, General José Tadeo Monagas, sat at his right hand. But Monagas had been plotting for months. He wanted the presidency for himself and had secretly recruited half of Paz's officers with promises of promotions and land. At the banquet, Monagas gave a toast to Paz, then added unexpected words. And to the new direction of Venezuela's destiny. Officers around the room stood and drew their swords in salute to Monagas, not Paz. Paz understood immediately. He reached for his own sword, but a dozen blades pointed at his chest. Monagas smiled and announced that Paz was under arrest for threatening the constitutional order. Soldiers who had fought beside Paz for 30 years now surrounded him as a prisoner. His own son-in-law had stolen everything. They imprisoned Paz in a fortress and later exiled him. Monagas seized the presidency and established a dynasty, installing his brother as the next president. Paz spent years trying to organize a return from exile. He finally came back to Venezuela at age 73, briefly serving as dictator, but his power was broken. The family member he had trusted most had executed his legacy completely.